My name is Laura, an addiction advocate. It's the best way I found to put it. This podcast is a way of opening up the door to discuss addiction, discuss where it comes from, the mental health pieces of it, brain pathways, genetic links, societal pieces, history, generational trauma, as well as the many, many ways of recovery. In addition to family support. So how does family and loved ones support the person, as well as how do we support the family and loved ones that are helping somebody through this, right? In addition to all that, this is also a space for those who have suffered from the disease to share their story, what that looked like, how did it get started, what helped, what didn't, words, and what are they doing now, that kind of thing, right? As well as those who have lost somebody, I'm struggling today, somebody to this disease, share their story of that person, the good, the bad, the fun, the crazy, all that, and kind of show the many ways that happens, right? Whether that's through overdose, suicide, murder, missing persons, just the incarceration, the many, many ways that can happen, right? It's so big and vast. So, mainly to kind of work on helping society understand where this all starts, what it is, and help kind of banish a little bit of that shame. So, all that being said, today we're going to talk about AA, which is one of those many, many ways of recovery. There is a really cool history behind AA. And I want to just kind of talk about it and talk about how it started and how it helps people and just all of that all that fun stuff. Trigger warnings for today. I don't think there's a ton. Just for talk about alcohol, and I am going to say alcoholics. Some people find that as a derogatory or upsetting term. I'm going to use that because that is how they choose to use it. They say Alcoholics Anonymous, and it does say alcoholics several times throughout the big book, throughout the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book. They say it throughout the website, so I will be using that terminology. I understand that some people choose to use addicts or those with an alcohol addiction. Many different ways to say it. I will choose to use alcoholics simply because that is how they've chosen to use it. There you go. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, Alcoholics Anonymous, just as an overall statement, is a free support group that allows alcoholics to support each other through sobriety using the big book, which I'll go into a little bit more, their own experience, and community. There's no education needed. These groups aren't run by a licensed therapist or a peer support person or anything like that. These are run by your regular everyday Joe, right? That's been through it, understands it, has the experience, and wants to help others. So these are just everybody helping each other, right? This is very much a community situation. They call it a fellowship, which in turn means just fellow people coming together to create a relationship, to create a group, to make it work, right? I don't know if anybody's heard the Serenity Prayer, but I kind of wanted to say that again because I love it so much. It says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that just speaks really well to just the whole concept of it. The history behind it is actually pretty interesting. If you ever get bored and want to watch a movie, it's called My Name is Bill W. And it goes into how it got started, and I think it touches a little bit on Al-Anon, which is for those families. Those touches a little bit on Al-Anon, which is a support group for those who have a family member with an addiction issue. But it's a dramatized version of the history of AA and how it got started. But it's actually a really good movie. I loved it. I showed it a couple of times while I was running groups, and most of my clients really enjoyed watching it. But it's a good movie. But the general concept, It started in about 1935 in Akron, Ohio, by a gentleman named Bill W., who was a stockbroker, and Dr. Bob, and this is how they put it on the AA website, who was a surgeon. They were both alcoholics. They both used the Oxford Group, which was a non-alcoholic type fellowship that used kind of more universal spiritual values in everyday living, which was kind of like, okay, if we're more spiritual, then we'll be able to stay sober, right? That was the concept. Bill had gotten sober through the Oxford Group, and then as well as the help of a friend named Ebby. And he had continued to stay sober by working with other addicts. And that was kind of how he had managed to maintain his sobriety. However, those that he continued to work with never seemed to be able to maintain their sobriety, right? He'd work with them, he'd kind of get them to a sober point, but then what he was teaching or his principles didn't quite get it as far as as they needed to continue to be sober. And then Dr. Bob wasn't able to get sober through the Oxford Group. It just, for some reason, things just weren't clicking. There was another member that was trying really hard with him, and just things just weren't clicking for him, and it just wasn't working. And so they had reached out to Bill because they knew that Bill had seemed to have some success. And so they kind of set up this meeting between the two. And during this whole meeting, Bill kind of explained his thought process behind addiction and alcoholism, and his follows along with that addiction as a disease concept, which I went over in my episode 2 about the disease of addiction, right? And so he felt that it was a disease of mind, emotions, and body, and how those all kind of connected. And if we can kind of work on all of those pieces, that helps the person obtain and maintain sobriety, right? And he had learned this from Dr. William D. Silkworth of Towns Hospital in New York. He had been a patient of Dr. Silkworth's a couple of times as he had worked through his alcoholism and trying to get sober. And for some reason, once he was able to kind of get this idea of like, it's a disease of like all of these parts of myself, he was able to kind of like, oh, this makes sense. And once he was able to then once Bill was able to explain this to Dr. Bob, all of a sudden it kind of clicked for Dr. Bob as well. And as I've said before, when I teach this concept to my clients, once they're all of a sudden like, oh, my brain does that, what the heck? It kind of clicks for them too. So kind of almost a universal concept of that really kind of clicking. But Dr. Bob and Bill used this understanding to work with alcoholics at Akron City Hospital. One other patient obtained sobriety. So they started working with this specific other patient and kind of started teaching them the same concept. And once that other patient kind of grasped it, they got sober. And then the three of them kind of became the first quote unquote AA group, right? It wasn't really called that yet, but they kind of formed that like nuclear kind of group there. And from there, they kind of started to grow out from there. So in the fall of 1935, the second group kind of formed in New York. And then there was a third one in Cleveland in 1939. So it started out fairly slow. As you can see, it kind of was like, we're getting there, right? But it's kind of happening slowly. Over the course of about 4 years, they got 100 sober alcoholics, which is a lot better than 0. 100's freaking awesome, especially when you picture like the ripple effect, right? Because you've got an alcoholic in the family and it's causing stress and issues at work or at home with wife and the kids and the family and everything else. So like when you've got an alcoholic that's sober, that then decreases the amount of stress that you're dealing with at home and at work and things like that. So that 100 creates a ripple effect of Lord knows how many, right? In 1939 was when they published the first basic book, or wrote the first basic book, I should say, Alcoholics Anonymous. And it explained kind of their methods and philosophy up to that point. It did get changed up and rewritten over time, but this was kind of their first basic concept. This was the first core 12 steps, and it also had a history of like 30 or so members. So some of those first members that really came on and really were able to obtain sobriety and really stick with it, and that were willing to kind of share that with the rest of the members. They put their stories in there, put their kind of methods, what makes sense to them, what helped them, that kind of thing, kind of dropped it in there, right? And this was the start of the 12 steps, right? I did find elsewhere that they started out with 6 steps and then increased it to 12. Couldn't find a date on that one for sure, but it does seem like at one point there was only half the steps. So, good to know, right? In 1939, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is a newspaper of some sort, published articles about AA with positive reviews, had quite a few of them. It led to many asking for help. So there was a lot of people calling in and asking for support and help. And at the time, Cleveland only had about 20 members, but those few that were sober started helping others, and it kind of changed that dynamic. And a few months later, they had 500 members. So this was kind of the start of that whole sponsorship thing that a lot of us see, where someone comes in and they're looking for help and they really don't know how to get started and they don't really know the 12 steps, so they ask somebody else for support. This was kind of the start of that. Somebody else who's found some stability, who has some experience, and it kind of guides them in a way. So this was kind of the start of that process. At first it was just kind of like a group, and they offered, come in, sit in the group, talk, but this offered these 20 or so members the ability to then give back and create more of that service work. In 1938, Bob and Bill organized a trusteeship. They were attempting to get large sums of money to try and grow it quite larger. But they kind of went back and forth on the concept of whether or not they really wanted to bring in a lot of money, or if they wanted to keep it more of a fellowship situation. And so there was some back and forth there. And it seems like they ended up not gaining a whole lot of large sums of money, right? They end up keeping it. Most of what they get money from nowadays, and from then and still today, is from AA members and basic donations from family, friends, people that want to help. So they weren't really pulling in huge donations or huge large sums of money, weren't taking on loans, things like that. They wanted to really just kind of focus on members helping members. And this whole trusteeship and all this was to handle those pleas of help. And so this kind of started even before that newspaper posted the article, luckily enough, right? So we had something in place. So they were handling these calls of anybody reaching out pretty much across the country of, I need help, I don't know what to do, can you offer me some support? As well as distributing the material. So whether that's the 12-step pamphlets, big book nowadays, things like that, right? In 1939, Liberty Magazine posted another article, which brought in 800 calls. So that's a huge jump. And then in 1940, Rockefeller Jr., who was also a part of that original trusteeship in 1938, publicized AA through I think it was some kind of banquet or something, brought in even more pleas for help. And with these pleas, they tried very hard to be very personable about it. So they sent out a personal letter to each one, and they sent out a pamphlet. And so it wasn't just like, oh, here's you sent us a call or you left us a message or something like that, and we'll just maybe get back to you. It was, we will absolutely make sure that you understand that we hear you, and we'll be very personal about it. It was, we need them to understand that we are on their level. It was a very one-to-one personal contact that they tried to bring in. around that same time, the book started circulating, so they had finally kind of gotten the big book going. And then at the end of that year, 1940, the membership had jumped to 2,000 members. And then in 1941, the Saturday Evening Post did an article which brought in another huge response, and membership jumped to 6,000 by the end of that year, and it had spread across the US and Canada. And then in 1940, 100,000 recovered worldwide. So that was 100,000 alcoholics had recovered at this point worldwide, right? And groups kept rising. They just kept getting more and more groups coming up and popping up everywhere. And then in 1950, they were finally able to kind of write the 12 traditions of AA. So they were able to kind of like really hone in on what are those traditions, what are super important to us, what do we want to make this all about. And they were kind of able to formulate all of that and put it into practice and their purpose and what they want. And so as you can see, that like happened pretty quickly, right? So like 1935 to 1950, that's like 15 years. Over the course of 15 years, we went from a little, well, actually it's like 16 years, sorry. No, 15 years. My numbers are off. From 1935, where we had this little meeting between two people, to 1950, all of a sudden we have groups all over the world and hundreds of thousands of people that are getting sober. Like, that's just insane how quickly that grew, which also points to the need, right? That this was something that they noticed, that a lot of people were really in need of this, and they recognized that and stepped forward and did it. And there were so many people that were like, yes, 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 please help me. And it served something for a lot of people. And during kind of all that time, that 15 years or so, Dr. Bob continued to work at the St. Thomas Hospital with Sister Ignatia, hope I said that right, to care for alcoholics. And they would continue to have a lot of people come into Akron for that care. They would come to that hospital specifically to work with Dr. Bob to get help. They had over 5,000 people that were served during that time that he was able to work there. And then Dr. Bob did pass away in 1950. The sister continued to care for the alcoholics at this hospital with the help of AA groups nearby. And at that point, over 10,000 more were able to continue to be served and get connection to AA groups and all of that. And it does show that connection of AA and medicine, and how those two can actually really work together and help to support these folks and kind of get them the care that they needed. And then in 1971, Bill passed away as well. So, and as you can see, them passing away didn't really make much of a change in the fact that this continued to live on. Like, their legacy is well beyond the length of their lives here on Earth. It has continued to go forward. At this point, AA is available in 180 nations. There's over 123,000 groups worldwide. And the big book, the 12 traditions, those two are available in over 100 languages, which is just insane to me. That, again, just shows how much of a need there is for this. The fact that it is everywhere. It shows that there's a need, and it also shows that it doesn't discriminate, right? If it's available in all of these nations, in all of these languages, and if there are that many groups, right, it shows that it is needed no matter what country you're in. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter what area of what county or state you're in, whether you're in a rural or a city-based, or whether you're in low income, high income. It doesn't matter, because these are available everywhere because they're needed everywhere. They come up as they're needed. It doesn't discriminate. It shows up everywhere. So I think that alone shows that. It really does. In the name, Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So why is it anonymous? A lot of people ask that question, right? and we're working on banishing the shame by being open and all of that here on this podcast. But I want to touch on why they feel like it's important to stay anonymous, and why I continue to take stories that post anonymously. It provides protection from identification. It provides safety for newcomers, right? Disclosure should be a choice, right? And a lot of that is because there is still that discrimination that comes up for somebody who has an addiction problem, right? Whether that's employers or relationships, maybe the family doesn't even know, right? And it could become an issue with the family. Like, there are some families that could very easily completely disown you if they knew that you had that problem, right? So it's one of those things that, like, as we try to work and become louder and we're open about this, the hope is that some of that will lessen over time, but it doesn't take away from how society is today, and doesn't take away from some of the unfortunate ramifications people can get from this coming out, right? It's also why we have such huge protections for those that are in treatment centers. We have HIPAA, right, which is the Health Information Protection Act. But we also have CFR 42, which also protects those in substance use treatment, and it puts an even higher level of protection for your health information for those that are in substance use treatment, because again, there can be so many things that can go wrong and so much trouble that people can get in just for that getting out. So there's a reason for that. So on an individual level, that's why. At a media level, it puts everyone kind of at an equal standpoint, right? Keeps them from exploiting it. It keeps people from exploiting it. So, right, like, we can't have wouldn't have like a congressman come out and be like, I'm a member of AA, right? And then, like, using it as a way to, like, get extra things, or get ahead on their campaign or something like that, right? That kind of keeps that from happening. Or if, your boss comes in and you come in, right, and you're both a member of AA, right? Maybe they're a member in this group and you're a member in this group, but the problem is, if you're both members and, like, it might create an uneven playing field, right? Because then you might feel like, oh, well, he knows I'm a member and I know he's a member. And then it could create an issue where you don't feel like you're safe because he knows something that he shouldn't know, right? It's one of those situations where we're trying very hard to make things even and equal, because the whole idea is that everybody's on an equal playing field, right? So with that, there's some rules that they try to put in place, like be careful online. So you don't want to try not to break your own, right? Don't come out. If you choose to, that's your own choice, right? But don't break other people's anonymity. You can disclose if you're in recovery, like if you're a recovered alcoholic or if you're a recovered addict, but don't disclose if you're a member. That's something that they frown upon and try to keep from happening. Never use full names or faces if disclosing as a member. So if they're going on like a TV show or a documentary or something, they try not to, like, come out as like, I'm a member of AA, right? Like, they try to, like, kind of backtrack that a little bit. If a member passes away, they generally won't disclose that they were a member. That's up to the family if they choose to, like, put that in their obituary or something, but make sure that they don't disclose any other names. So again, trying to maintain that anonymity so that other people around them continue to maintain that as well. Yeah. And then the big book, like I said, I mentioned it. The entire thing is available online. If you go to aa.org, they actually have the entire thing. Available. Like, you can just pull it up and read it if you'd like to. You can also buy it, right? You can buy it off their website. You can get it on Amazon. Like, you can get it on Kindle. Like, you can get it anywhere. Like, it's really easy to get, which is also awesome. It tells a lot of stories of recovered alcoholics, tells Bill's story, tells the story of, like, the history, how things got started, all of that. Goes over the philosophy, the process, the 12 steps, does have a chapter on speaking to the family, like how can you support them, talks to spouses, like an aftercare plan. So if like you finish this and decide you don't want to continue, or if you do, what would that look like? How to work with others if you choose to do service, what would that look like? And it also goes into talking about alcoholism. And it does, on the website, you go on there, it does allow you to take a self-assessment. Like you can go on there and take an assessment that decides whether or not you're an alcoholic, basically. But it basically goes into exactly the same diagnoses that I would, but it kind of goes into it and asks the same questions. Like, is this affecting your life? Is it affecting your relationships? Is it, are you continuing to drink despite the fact that you have all these consequences? Are you building up a tolerance? Are you having to drink more and more each time? Are you waking up with a hangover? Are you thinking about drinking all day long, right? So, and the big book does go into that as well. Like, what is alcoholism? Where does it come from? What are the signs and symptoms? And why might you be dealing with this? It does try very hard to get into the nitty gritty of it. So it's not just come to this group, listen to a bunch of people talk, and be on your merry way, right? It does spend a lot of time trying to get you to understand what's going on, which understanding is one of the biggest parts of this, because if we just kind of go in and pretend like we know what we're doing, right? Having some understanding can be the biggest part, because that's when things start to click. Again, when we learn that it's a disease or that it's a problem of our mind and our body kind of working against us, we can really kind of start moving forward and being like, oh, okay, so I might have some ability to work on this. Where do I make some changes and how do I make changes? Things like that. As far as meetings go, there's different ways. So there's open meetings and closed meetings. So open meetings are like anybody can join at any time, right? So that means that like newcomers can join, this week and not next week, but can, there's no like set amount of group number, and then you have to set amount of group sessions, and then and then it starts over, and that's the only time you can jump in, which would be a closed group. So closed group would be like there's 6 sessions, and you start during those 6 sessions, and then no other new members can join until the 6 sessions are over. So closed group generally means we kind of just have these members, and it's a way of kind of creating a cohesive kind of uniformity in that group. And then you can start again with a new group, and it allows some amount of like consistency. But an open group is generally those ones that it's just like, we're going to just have new people kind of coming in and out as you go. So that's something you might want to decide, if like, are you okay with like new people kind of coming in and out, filtering in and out as you go each week? Or would you rather have it where it's the same people every time, and maybe in a couple weeks they are willing to let a few new people in, and then you close it again. They do have in-person groups, and now they have a lot more online groups. Didn't used to be as much of a thing until, of course, COVID happened, and now we have all these options. They can be held kind of anywhere. A lot of churches hold them. Sometimes you can find office buildings that'll open them up at the end of the night for that. Treatment centers, rec centers, clubhouses. I mean, if you literally just look it up, you can find groups all over the place, right? They have a couple different styles depending upon kind of what you're looking for. They can have discussion where it's literally just everybody just kind of talking about something. They might have a speaker come in. Sometimes they might have somebody who has really been successful in this kind of come in and really kind of give their speech, give their talk, and kind of be open about kind of what they've done. They might have one that's just for newcomers or beginners, and they come in and they just kind of like go over the new process, things like that. They might have like one that's just focused on the steps, traditions, or the big book. And so that one might be more of kind of like a learning group where somebody comes in and just kind of teaches on a different step, and they kind of go over it and work on that step that time. They also have ones that might be more geared towards something specific. So they can be women's AA, men's AA. They can be, I've also seen them where they're geared towards ones that like have a co-occurring mental health issue. They're like AA with bipolar, AA with anxiety, right? Like where they're like, okay, those that really suffer from this, let's bring you in, right? Or more ADA accommodations, those that maybe AA with some developmental issues, things like that. Maybe for older folks, senior citizens, young adults, teens, right? Different age groups. So kind of all encompassing. There's a way to kind of find one that maybe matches you or works for you better. The process is kind of like the chair. So whoever's kind of like really the go-to, the one that kind of runs that group will usually open. Sometimes they have a moment of silence or the serenity prayer that I read in the beginning. Might do a reading from the big book, talk about that statement of anonymity, right? Like remind everybody, we're going to keep this anonymous. Everybody kind of share some experiences. They might get up and kind of talk, share their story or share what they need to talk about. Usually close with a prayer or a moment of silence again. And then afterwards, it's usually like some social time. That might be where you kind of find a sponsor or you kind of get to know people in the group, ask questions if you're new, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then sponsors, right? So a lot of people think sponsor means like you need to have this person to like bring you into the group and introduce you and all that. That's not how it works. So they don't need to vouch for you. This is somebody who meets with you on like literally an equal playing field that just helps you kind of navigate this process, because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm just going to go to this group and it's going to be super easy and I'm going to do it. It's not. It's hard. It's difficult. It's a lot of work, right? Especially if you do plan to actually go through the 12 steps, that can be confusing and a lot of work. And so having a sponsor, it's kind of like a friend to kind of just walk beside you and like point out, there's a rock there, careful. Or, hey, you see that ladder right there? This is kind of how we climb that ladder, right? It's kind of a way to kind of guide you and just help you along the way. Point out maybe some pitfalls that they've maybe fallen through, help you kind of understand, well, this is what that step means, or, maybe this is how I've understood that principle. I would try it this way, or maybe when you go to make amends, this might not work, but maybe try this, right? Just kind of giving you a little bit of guidance, support, help, and also to be there as somebody when shit hits the fan, because it's going to, right? When you're trying to get sober, you're going to have those moments where you're craving stuff or you're wanting to lose your mind, and you need somebody to reach out to that really understands what you're going through, right? That understands what it's like to crave, understands what it's like for everything to feel like hell and you want to give up. And that person's going to be there to be like, you know what, I understand, talk to me. Or, hey, let's go get some coffee. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about something else. Let's focus on something different, to help just kind of get you through those tough spots. So that's kind of what a sponsor is. There's also a pamphlet on that on the AA.org that really kind of goes into, what can I do? What can't I do? What'll be helpful? What won't be? Those kind of things. So as I said, they do have like these 12 principles and 12 steps. So the 12 traditions, right? So I won't like read them verbatim, but I kind of want to go over them in basic. So these are kind of guidelines for members and groups to kind of keep that anonymity, the unity, and the focus on kind of spirituality. Covers kind of those topics about like public relations, that anonymity, finance, service, kind of just all that stuff. So number one is like the common welfare. So focusing on kind of everybody, and that unity. Two is the group purpose is the ultimate authority. So it's basically like we want to, so it's all about the group and focusing on that higher power and not on like that leader as being the higher power, kind of that focus. And then three, like the only requirement for that membership is a desire to stop drinking. Like, again, they don't have to have an education. They don't have to have a certain ethnicity or whatever. Like, that's the only requirement. And then four is like each group should be autonomous. Like they should be able to kind of like make their own decisions, kind of do their own thing, unless it's like making a decision that affects like AA as a whole, right? Five, each group has but one primary purpose, and that's to carry that message, right? And it's to like help other alcoholics get better. AA is to never endorse, finance, or lend AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise. So basically they're trying not to like, oh, I'll give money if you'll do, right? There's no like, I can't think of the word right now. There's no like back and forth of the money unless it's like, unless there's a reason like if we don't help with this, it might divert our ability to continue our mission, right? So one of those. And then the A groups, and then 7A groups should be fully self-supporting, right? They're able to kind of like make their own ability, right? They shouldn't need outside contributions. Again, we're not pulling in grants to make this hard. 8, and Alcoholics Anonymous is like non-professional. Like they're not looking for employees, right? Unless it's like their centers, like their main centers, they may employ like specific workers to like take in like those phone calls, things like that. But generally it's like based upon the members doing service for themselves. And then 9, so it's not never, it says ought never be organized. So it's kind of one of those, but we may create service boards or committees. So it's one of those, like, they're not trying to create like a pyramid or like we're ahead of you and we're right. They're trying to keep it as equal as they can, right? But have some boards and committees that kind of help to make sure that things are kind of running according to the principles and supporting their purpose, right? And then 10, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, right? So, they're not going to get involved in like those public or those political issues. They're trying to like not drag their name into it, because again, then that creates a whole other issue that we don't want to get into. And then 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. So it's a lot of like, we're not going to go out and like promote AA everywhere, right? It's a lot of like, hey, like this is helpful. If you'd like to join me, great, but not, end of the world if you don't, right? It's a lot of just people kind of coming as they do. And then 12, anonymity is a spiritual foundation of all of our traditions. And they're trying to place those principles before personalities. So it's like, again, I'm not higher than you, so we're going to try and keep that anonymity as a placeholder to keep us separate. Okay. And then this is the part that everybody knows about, right? There's the 12 steps. So I want to kind of end on this part. So I'm going to touch on this. So, and this kind of outlines the course of treatment, how to handle issues and problems with addiction. So number 1 is based on honesty. So it's that we're admitting that we kind of like this alcohol has a power over us, that our lives have kind of been unmanageable up to this point. So we're going to work on doing that better. 2 is hope. That power, that higher power is greater than ourselves, can restore us to sanity, can help us. 3 is that surrender. So we're turning ourselves over to that higher power and that support that they can give us. 4 is that courage. So we're kind of taking an inventory of ourselves, kind of finding those issues, those unmanageable parts. And then 5 is integrity. And that's where we're admitting to this higher power and to another human being, what our wrongs are, where we've made mistakes. 6 is willingness, where we're entirely ready to kind of remove all of these defects, where we're kind of willing to work on all of those wrongs that we've done. Humility, we ask for this higher power to remove our shortcomings, to kind of help us work through those problems. Love is where we make a list of all the persons that we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them. And the responsibility, which is where we start making amends to them, right? Except if doing so would cause more harm. And that's a big caveat to keep in mind. And then 10, discipline, which is where we continue to take personal inventory. And if we do another wrong, we promptly work on changing that. Awareness, we just consciously stay in contact with that higher power, and kind of help them keep us in kind of check and spiritually aware, and recognize the power that they have in keeping us safe. And then service. Once we have that spiritual kind of awakening through these steps, we're able to then kind of carry that message on forward and practice these principles in all of the places that we go forward. So all great principles, right? Honesty, hope, surrender, courage, integrity, willingness, humility, love, responsibility, discipline, awareness, and service. These are all amazing concepts. And I go back to a lot of the AA kind of sayings. One of my favorites is HALT, right? Don't ever make a decision if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, because our emotions tend to be all over the place when we're in any one of those places. So AA is a great resource, and clients who are in like a treatment center, I'll usually say, like, as you're getting out of this, I always suggest trying to find a sponsor, trying to get in an AA group, because this community will help keep you sober going forward. There's a lot of people that are able to use use AA as a way to get sober and stay sober, and that works perfectly for them, and that's wonderful. There's a lot of people that in treatment center to do that and then go on to this. That works too. There's some people that start out in AA and they're like, nope, this isn't quite working for me. I need to go back and try again. I need to try a treatment center and then try this. There's some people that try treatment centers and never try AA because they're like, I just can't do that. Whatever works for you. This is just one of the many, right? In terms of family and loved ones that can support, like I said, there is Al-Anon, which is kind of an akin to this, that they can go meet at. And like I said, that movie, My Name is Bill W., it actually, towards the end, it talks about, it shows his wife kind of deciding, I think I need a group for me and the wives who are going through all of this. So if you want to, that is a great chance to kind of like see that and recognize that as well. In addition to, a lot of these groups are pretty open to having loved ones come along with them. I've done that for a number of people I care about, where I go with them to a group for the first time or two, and just sit. And, when they ask, who are you? Why are you here? You're just like, I'm a support person. And they're like, cool. And they let it go. Right. And it's a great way for them to not feel so alone and scared, because sometimes going by yourself is scary. So just being willing to go and sit with them is a great way to do it, right? Or maybe you drive them to it and you sit in the car, or you drive them to it and you sit outside the meeting, right? And again, that anonymity, right? They're willing, as long as you're willing to agree to, like, I'm going to keep whatever stories in here, anonymous. They're usually pretty open to that and willing to do that. But always double check, right? They might be like, well, I prefer you step out, which is fine. Be open and understanding of that piece. But if your loved one needs a little bit of extra help, sometimes just going and sitting with them is a big deal. So, yeah, I will link aa.org below so that you can look at the big book, the 12 traditions, and it links ways to find your groups nearby as well. So, all that, like I said, we're working on kind of banishing that shame, but we're also working on understanding what addiction is and all the different ways that we can kind of find help and the different options there are out there for us to support each other in it. But let's keep making these conversations loud. Let's share our stories so society can see addicts as people and understand our loss and our stressors. Yeah, make sure you subscribe if you'd like to share your story, or if you have suggestions on things you'd like me to cover. You can find me on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, or my website at A Family Addiction. But yeah, tell me your story.